My parents never chose me. Part 1. Always second best. Growing up in the Palmer household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. For my younger brother Jason, that place was at the top, the golden child, the future of the family. For me, Emma Palmer, I was the reliable backup plan, the insurance policy they never thought they'd need to cash in. Our suburban Chicago home was a shrine to Jason's accomplishments. Trophies lined the mantel, ribbons adorned the walls, and framed newspaper clippings of his soccer victories were prominently displayed in my father's home office. My academic certificates and honor roll mentions were tucked away in a drawer somewhere, presumably. "Emma, come see this," my mother would call, her voice filled with a pride I rarely heard directed at me. I'd dutifully leave my homework to watch Jason perform some new trick or share some mediocre accomplishment that would be celebrated like he'd cured cancer. By the time I was 12 and Jason was 10, the pattern was firmly established. We weren't just siblings with different interests. We were competitors in a race I hadn't signed up for and couldn't possibly win. Jason could charm his way out of anything. When he crashed Dad's car at 16, a gleaming BMW that was supposed to be off-limits, it was dismissed as boys being boys after a stern but short-lived lecture. When I got a C+ in calculus during my junior year, while taking care of Jason when he had mono, no less, I was grounded for a month because Palmers don't settle for average. "You're the responsible one, Emma," my father would say, as if my reliability was somehow less valuable than Jason's charisma. "You know better." Our family photo albums told the story better than I could. Jason's soccer tournaments took up entire volumes, each goal documented as if historians might someday need proof of his athletic prowess. My academic decathlon medals gathered dust in a shoebox under my bed, alongside debate team certificates and writing competition wins that never made it to the family highlight reel. "It's not that we're not proud," my mother would explain when I worked up the courage to ask why my art contest win wasn't mentioned at dinner. "It's just that everyone expects you to do well in those brainy things. It comes naturally to you." Nothing came naturally to me. I studied until midnight, woke up at 5, and practiced presentations in the shower. But in my parents' eyes, Jason's C, earned through minimal effort, was more praiseworthy than my A+ achieved through relentless work. By senior year, I'd learned to set my own expectations. I worked evenings at the local bookstore and weekends at a coffee shop, squirreling away money for college while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. My parents barely noticed my absence from family dinners. There was always some game of Jason's to attend, some social event where he could shine. Mrs. Abernathy, my English teacher, became my unofficial guidance counselor, helping me navigate college applications and scholarship essays during lunch breaks. "You're selling yourself short," she told me one afternoon as I reluctantly added Cornell to my application list at her insistence. "You're exactly what they're looking for." "My parents think I should stay closer to home," I explained. "Community college first, then transfer to state. It's more practical." Mrs. Abernathy fixed me with a look I'd come to recognize, part frustration, part determination. "And what do you want, Emma?" It was such a simple question, but I found I couldn't answer it immediately. No one had ever really asked before. When the letter from Cornell arrived with a full-ride scholarship offer, I couldn't contain my excitement. I burst into the kitchen where my parents were having coffee, my hands trembling as I held the oversized envelope. "I got in. Full scholarship." The words tumbled out as I pulled the official letter from the envelope. Mrs. Abernathy was right. They loved my essay about. Mom glanced up from her phone, her expression unchanged. "Well, at least we won't have to pay for it." Dad nodded absently, returning to his newspaper. "That's nice, Emma. Have you seen Jason's cleats? He has practice in an hour." I stood there, letter clutched to my chest, waiting for something more. A hug, perhaps. A congratulations. Maybe even just a smile of acknowledgement. When nothing came, I carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "I think his cleats are in the dryer," I said quietly, tucking my future back into its paper container. 3 months later, Jason got accepted to State University, a perfectly respectable school, but nothing exceptional given his advantages. His GPA had been boosted by the extensive tutoring my parents had paid for, and his essay, which I knew my mother had heavily edited, highlighted his community service experience, which consisted primarily of a beach cleanup he'd attended for 2 hours before leaving early for a party. That night, my parents reserved a private room at Bellini's, the fanciest restaurant in town. They invited the extended family, ordered champagne, and toasted to the continuing legacy of excellence in the Palmer name. As I watched my brother bask in the attention, something crystallized in my mind. I wasn't unloved. I was simply unseen. And maybe I never would be, at least not by the people who were supposed to see me first. I'm heading to Cornell in August, I mentioned during a lull in the conversation, wondering if anyone would react differently in public. Oh, that's right, my Aunt Martha said, smiling. Full scholarship, wasn't it? That's impressive, Emma. I felt a momentary glow of recognition until my mother laughed lightly. Emma's always been good with books. But Jason, he's got the whole package. Academics, athletics, and such people skills. He's going to go so far. The table murmured in agreement, and just like that, my achievement was once again relegated to the background of the Jason Palmer show. Later that night, as I helped clear the dessert plates while Jason held court with our cousins, Aunt Martha found me in the restaurant kitchen. Your mother doesn't realize what she's doing, she said quietly. But I see you, Emma. And what you've accomplished is extraordinary. I blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you. Cornell is a fresh start, she continued, squeezing my shoulder. Don't look back. As I drove home that night, following my parents' car with Jason riding shotgun, I made a silent promise to myself. Cornell wouldn't just be my education, it would be my escape. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally find a place where being Emma Palmer was enough. Part 2. My wedding was a betrayal. Cornell was everything I needed. Challenging classes, genuine friends, and blessed distance from my family's hierarchy. I called home weekly for the first month, then bi-weekly, then monthly. No one seemed to notice the decreasing frequency. When I did call, the conversation inevitably circled back to Jason's struggles adjusting to college life. He's finding the coursework so demanding, Mom would sigh. And the baseball coach is much tougher than in high school. I'd listen to 15 minutes of Jason updates before Mom would remember to ask, "Oh, and how are your classes going?" By the time I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in finance and economics, I had built a life entirely separate from my family. My parents attended graduation, the bare minimum expected for socially acceptable parents, but left immediately after to catch Jason's summer league baseball game. No celebration dinner, no photos together beneath the ivy-covered buildings, no proud hugs that lingered a moment too long. Aunt Lisa sent me flowers and a card that read, "They may not see it, but I do. Congratulations, superstar." It meant more than anything my parents had ever given me. I moved to Manhattan and landed a job at a prestigious financial firm. My tiny apartment in the East Village became my sanctuary, decorated with artwork from street fairs and furniture cobbled together from thrift stores and IKEA. It was wholly mine, untouched by my family's preferences or priorities. I met Tom at a coworker's Halloween party. I was dressed as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, complete with a justice robe and oversized glasses, and he was the most half-hearted Superman I'd ever seen. "I just grabbed this at the last minute," he admitted, tugging at the cheap polyester cape. "Though I'm pretty sure Supreme Court justices and superheroes don't typically mingle." "They do tonight," I replied, raising my plastic cup in a toast. Tom worked in architectural design, creating spaces that balanced functionality with beauty. When he talked about his projects, his eyes lit up with the same passion I felt analyzing market trends. We were both builders in our own way, me with numbers, him with structures. On our third date, we walked through Central Park as an unexpected snowfall transformed the city. Beneath a lamppost dusted with white, Tom turned to me and said, "You know what I like about you, Emma? You actually see me." Something in his words unlocked a door I'd kept firmly shut. For the first time, I told someone the full story of my childhood, not the sanitized version I usually shared, but the raw truth of feeling invisible in my own home. Tom listened without interrupting, his hand steady in mine. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes or quick fixes. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry they couldn't see your worth. But I do." From that moment, I knew Tom was different from anyone I'd ever met. He attended my work functions with genuine interest, remembered small details about my preferences, and considered my opinion on everything from movie choices to major life decisions. When I was passed over for a promotion I'd worked tirelessly for, he brought over ice cream and a shoulder to cry on. When I finally received the promotion 6 months later, he organized a surprise celebration with all my friends. After 2 years together, Tom proposed during a weekend trip to the Berkshires. We were hiking along a ridge overlooking a valley of autumn colors when he stopped suddenly and took both my hands. "Emma Williams," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes, "you are the most extraordinary person I've ever known. You've built yourself into someone amazing despite every obstacle. I want to build a life with you, one where you never doubt your value for a single moment." He dropped to one knee. "Will you marry me?" I said yes through tears, feeling for the first time that I was someone's first choice. That evening, after calling Tom's parents, who screamed with joy and demanded we come visit immediately, I called my family. Dad answered and immediately put me on speakerphone. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, "I have some news. Tom proposed today and I said yes. We're engaged." The silence that followed lasted just a beat too long. "Well," my mother finally said, her tone eerily flat, "that's certainly a surprise." "You've only been dating for 2 years, Dad added. "That seems a bit rushed." "We're sure about this," I replied, my initial joy rapidly deflating. "Well, you could have at least waited until Jason got married first," my mother said, her disapproval unmistakable. I felt my chest tighten. "Jason isn't even dating anyone seriously." "Still," Mom continued, "these things have an order, Emma. As the older sibling, you should understand that." Tom, seeing my expression crumple, gently took the phone. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, we're very excited about our engagement and hope you'll share in our happiness. We're thinking of a spring wedding next year." My mother's response was directed at me, as if Tom hadn't spoken. "Emma, we should discuss this further when you're being more reasonable." That night, lying in bed beside Tom in our cozy bed and breakfast, I stared at the ceiling and felt a strange sense of clarity. "They're never going to change, are they?" Tom traced patterns on my arm. "Probably not. But we don't need them to." Despite my parents' lukewarm response, we threw ourselves into wedding planning. I found a perfect venue, a restored industrial space with exposed brick and giant windows overlooking the Brooklyn skyline. Tom's parents flew in from Chicago to help with arrangements, his mother accompanying me to dress fittings when mine showed no interest. "Your dress is stunning," Mrs. Chin said, tearing up as I stood on the pedestal in a flowing A-line gown with delicate lace detailing. Tom is going to be speechless. 3 months before the wedding, I sent formal invitations to everyone, including my parents. When 2 weeks passed without an RSVP, I called home. "Mom, did you receive the wedding invitation? The RSVP deadline is coming up." "Oh, those fancy cards?" "Yes, they came. You know we're busy, Emma. Jason's training for the regional semifinals, and we're coordinating the team parents support group. It's my wedding, Mom. I need to know if you and Dad are coming." She sighed as if I were asking for an unreasonable favor. "We'll see, Emma. You know how these things go." The weeks passed and still no RSVP. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called again, my anxiety mounting. "Emma, you're being dramatic," my father said. "Of course we'll try to be there." "Try." As if my wedding were an optional social event, like a colleague's cocktail party. The day before the wedding, I called one last time. "Mom, the rehearsal dinner is tonight, and the ceremony is tomorrow at 3 p.m. Are you and Dad coming?" "Oh, Emma," she said, her voice distant. "Jason just qualified for the state championship. The game is tomorrow afternoon, and you know how important this is for his career. We can't possibly miss it." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "So, you're choosing a baseball game over my wedding?" It's not just a game, Emma. This could lead to professional scouting opportunities. I'm sure you understand.
I didn't understand.
Not at all. No, actually, I don't. This is my wedding day. The most important day of my life. You're being selfish, my mother said, her tone hardening. Jason needs our support right now. You have Tom and his family. I ended the call without saying goodbye, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Tom found me sitting on our apartment floor, surrounded by seating arrangement cards. They're not coming, I said, my voice oddly calm. They're going to Jason's baseball game instead. Tom sat beside me, his shoulder pressed against mine. Their loss, Em. Truly their loss. That night at the rehearsal dinner, surrounded by friends and Tom's loving family, I pushed thoughts of my parents to the back of my mind. Mrs. Chen made a beautiful toast, calling me the daughter she'd always wanted. My college roommate shared embarrassing stories that had everyone laughing. The empty chairs I'd reserved for my parents were quickly filled by friends who refused to let me feel their absence. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. As I prepared with my bridesmaids, I checked my phone one last time. No messages. No calls. They're really not coming, I whispered to Leah, who had flown in from Seattle to be my maid of honor. Leah squeezed my hand. Then we'll make this day so amazing they'll regret missing it for the rest of their lives. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of. Walking down the aisle alone was a statement in itself. I had carried myself this far in life, and I would take these final steps into my future on my own terms. When I reached Tom, his eyes shining with tears and promise, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. At the reception, we danced and celebrated with people who truly cared about us. Aunt Lisa came, pointedly skipping Jason's game to be there. Some things matter more than baseball, she said, hugging me tightly. As Tom and I swayed to our first dance, I whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." He pressed his forehead to mine. Always. That night, scrolling through the photos our friends had already posted online, I saw a picture that stopped me cold. It showed my parents and extended family gathered around a restaurant table, celebrating. The caption read, "Congratulations to Jason Williams on making the championship and to meeting his amazing new girlfriend." Family dinner to celebrate. They hadn't even bothered to make up an excuse. On my wedding day, they had hosted a dinner for Jason and some girl he'd just started dating. Tom found me staring at my phone, tears streaming silently down my face. "They had a family dinner," I said, showing him the photo. "They weren't too busy. They just chose not to come." Tom took the phone gently from my hands and set it face down on the nightstand. "Emma, look at me," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Today, you gained a family that will never put you second. That's what matters now." As I fell asleep in my husband's arms, I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it freely. It was time to stop playing a game rigged against me from the start. Part 3. I stopped playing by their rules. The honeymoon was 2 glorious weeks in Portugal, cobblestone streets, wine country, and coastal villages where time seemed to move differently. Tom and I explored ancient castles, ate seafood at tiny restaurants where no one spoke English, and fell even more deeply in love away from the pressures of daily life. With each passing day, the knot of hurt in my chest loosened slightly. By the time we returned to New York, I had almost convinced myself that my parents' absence from my wedding didn't matter. Almost. 3 days after we returned, my phone rang with my mother's number. I stared at it vibrating on our kitchen counter, feeling my stomach clench. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to give them the same silent treatment they'd given me. But a lifetime of conditioning is hard to break. I answered. "Hello." "Emma, finally," my mother said, her voice cheerful as if nothing had happened. "We've been waiting to hear about your trip. How was the honeymoon?" I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear, unable to process her casual tone. "You're calling to ask about my honeymoon?" "Of course. We want to hear all about it. Maybe you could come over for dinner this weekend? Your father is grilling his famous ribeyes." The sheer audacity stunned me. "Mom," I said slowly, "you and Dad missed my wedding. You didn't call, you didn't send a gift, you didn't even text me on my wedding day. Oh, Emma, she sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. We've been over this. Jason's game was the same day, and you know how important. I saw the photos. I interrupted, my voice shaking. You hosted a family dinner for Jason and his new girlfriend that night. A pause. Well, we had all the family in town already for the game. It just made sense. All the family except me and my husband. On my wedding day. I thought you'd be happy knowing we had a nice time, she said defensively. We thought it was best not to take attention away from Jason until he got married. You wouldn't want to ruin his moment, would you? Something inside me, something that had been bending and stretching for decades, finally snapped. His moment, I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. You turned my wedding day into another celebration for Jason, and you're worried about ruining his moment? You've always been so independent, Emma, my mother continued, clearly not hearing me. Jason needs more support. You understand that, right? You've always been the self-sufficient one. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own.
No, Mom.
I've never been self-sufficient. I've been neglected. There's a difference. That's a terrible thing to say. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? The words poured out, years of unspoken hurt finally finding voice. When have you ever put me first? When have you ever celebrated my achievements without immediately shifting focus to Jason? You're being dramatic. We've always treated you and Jason exactly the same. That lie, so blatant it was almost comical, was the final straw. No, you haven't. But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm done. Done with what? Her voice had an edge of concern now, as if she was finally registering that something was wrong. Done trying to be part of a family that doesn't want me. Done pretending that the scraps of attention you throw my way are enough. Done playing by your rules. Emma, you can't just. I can. And I am. Don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize, really apologize, for missing my wedding and for every other time you've made me feel invisible. I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling. Tom, who had been pretending not to listen while making coffee, approached cautiously. You okay? I nodded, surprising myself with how true it felt. Actually, I think I am. That evening, I blocked my parents' numbers on my phone. I unfollowed them on social media. I removed myself from the family group chat. It wasn't dramatic or vindictive. It was self-preservation. The next morning, Aunt Lisa called. Your mother is beside herself, she said without preamble. Says you've cut her off completely. I told her I needed space until she could apologize for missing my wedding, I replied, bracing for another defense of my parents. Good for you, Aunt Lisa said, surprising me. It's about damn time. Over the next weeks, I discovered how much mental energy I'd been expending on my family. Without the constant low-grade anxiety of trying to earn their approval, I felt lighter. I threw myself into work, was promoted to senior analyst, and started taking evening classes toward an MBA. Tom and I began looking at houses in the suburbs, planning for the future we wanted. The holidays approached, our first as a married couple. Tom's parents invited us to Chicago, and we accepted gratefully. No awkward family dynamics, no watching Jason open twice as many presents, no pretending it didn't hurt. A week before Thanksgiving, my father emailed me. The subject line read, Family Matters. Emma, your mother and I feel you're being childish about the wedding situation. Families have conflicts and move on. We've always supported you, and this silent treatment is unbecoming of the mature young woman we raised. Jason is bringing his girlfriend, Megan, home for Thanksgiving. We expect you and Tom to join us as usual. It wouldn't look right for you to be absent from the family table.
Dad.
The email didn't contain a single apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a command to appear and maintain the facade of family harmony. I forwarded it to Tom with a comment, and they wonder why I'm keeping my distance. I didn't respond to my father's email. Instead, I posted photos of Tom and me with his family in Chicago, building gingerbread houses and playing charades after Thanksgiving dinner. I wasn't trying to be petty. I was simply living my life and sharing my genuine happiness. Christmas came and went. Then New Year's. Then my birthday. No calls from my parents, though Jason texted a generic happy birthday that was probably prompted by our mother. In March, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Jason and Megan were getting married in June, a lavish affair at the country club where my parents were members, with a 5-course dinner and a live band. The invitation was addressed only to me, with no mention of Tom. I RSVP'd with a polite decline and sent a mid-range item from their registry, a knife set that was neither cheap nor extravagant. Professional courtesy, nothing more. 2 days later, my mother called from an unknown number, bypassing my block. "What do you mean you're not coming to Jason's wedding?" she demanded, skipping any greeting. "Hello to you too, Mom," I replied calmly. "I have prior commitments that weekend."
Cancel them, she ordered.
"This is your brother's wedding. The whole family will be there." "I'm not available," I repeated. And, by the way, weddings are typically important events where both spouses are invited. The invitation only had my name on it. "Well, we assumed you'd know Tom was included," she said dismissively. "Don't be difficult, Emma. Like you assumed I'd know you were too busy with Jason's baseball game to attend my wedding?"
A sharp intake of breath.
"Are you still harping on that? It was months ago." "Yes, it was. And I'm still waiting for an apology. If that's your condition for attending Jason's wedding, then fine. I'm sorry you felt hurt by our absence. Now will you come?" I almost laughed at the non-apology. "That's not how this works, Mom. You don't get to ignore me for months, exclude my husband from an invitation, and then demand I show up to maintain your perfect family image." "It's not about image," she protested. "It's about family." "Exactly," I said quietly. "And you showed me exactly where I stand in this family when you chose a baseball game over my wedding." "Jason asked about you specifically," she tried next, changing tactics. "He wants you there. He misses you. If Jason wants to talk to me, he has my number. But I won't be attending his wedding." I ended the call, feeling strangely calm. The old Emma would have capitulated, would have pushed aside her own feelings to keep the peace. The new Emma, the one who had stopped playing by their rules, knew her worth. A week later, an oversized envelope arrived, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Chen. Inside was a formal wedding invitation for Jason and Megan's wedding, with a handwritten note from my brother. "I know things have been weird with the family. I miss my big sister. It would mean a lot to have you and Tom at the wedding. Jason." It was the most direct communication I'd had from my brother in years. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. Maybe I was being too harsh? But then I remembered all the one-sided sacrifices, all the times I'd shown up for a family that never showed up for me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I thought carefully about what I wanted from this relationship. Did I want to cut ties with Jason completely? Did I want to rebuild something new? Could I have a relationship with my brother separate from my parents? After a week of reflection, I texted Jason. "Thanks for the invitation and note. I'm still figuring out where I stand with the family after everything that's happened. Can we grab coffee sometime, just the two of us?" His response came quickly. "Absolutely. Name the time and place." We met at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our apartments. It was awkward at first. We had never really talked as adults without our parents' influence shaping the dynamic. Jason looked older than I remembered, more serious. "So," he said after we'd exchanged pleasantries, "you've been avoiding the family." "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "There's a difference." Jason stirred his coffee uncomfortably. "Mom and Dad say you're holding a grudge because they missed your wedding." "They didn't miss it, Jason. They chose not to come. They were at your baseball game, and then they hosted a dinner for you and Megan that same night." His eyes widened slightly. "I didn't know about the timing. They said your wedding was the same weekend as my game, but I didn't realize it was the exact same day." "Well, now you know." I sipped my latte, watching his face as he processed this information. "That's pretty bad," he admitted finally. "I'm sorry, Em. I would have said something if I'd known." "Would you? You've benefited from their favoritism your entire life." He flinched. "That's not fair." I didn't ask to be the favorite. No, but you never objected to it either. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us thick with years of unaddressed inequality. What do you want, Emma? Jason asked finally. Do you want me to tell Mom and Dad they were wrong? Do you want me to skip family events in solidarity? What? I considered his questions carefully. I want acknowledgement. I want them to recognize how they've treated me differently my entire life. I want a genuine apology for missing my wedding. And I want respect for my boundaries going forward. And if they can't give you that, then I'll continue living my life without them in it. Jason nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I am sorry. For not seeing it sooner. For not speaking up. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Thank you. As we prepared to leave, Jason asked, So, will you come to the wedding? I gave him a small smile. I'll think about it. I didn't decide immediately. Tom and I discussed it at length, weighing the potential for drama against the possibility of reconciliation. In the end, we agreed to attend the ceremony but skip the reception, a compromise that allowed me to support my brother without subjecting myself to hours of family dynamics. I informed Jason of our decision by text, and he responded with a simple thank you. It means a lot. What I didn't know then was that my absence from family gatherings had not gone unnoticed in our extended family. My cousin Rachel called me one evening, curious about why I'd been missing from holiday celebrations. I heard you and your parents had a falling out, she said, but no one will say why. I hesitated, not wanting to seem like I was spreading family gossip. We're taking some space from each other. Because they missed your wedding, right? She didn't wait for confirmation. Aunt Lisa told us. She said they went to Jason's baseball game instead, and then had some family dinner without you. On your actual wedding day. That's accurate, I confirmed. That's messed up, Emma. Like, really messed up. I would have come to your wedding if I'd known. A lot of us would have. Her words planted a seed of realization. My parents hadn't just excluded me from the family narrative. They controlled what narrative the rest of the family received. Over the next few weeks, more relatives reached out, each with pieces of the story they'd heard through the family grapevine. With each conversation, it became clear that my parents had been minimizing their actions, painting me as unreasonably angry over a simple scheduling conflict. The truth was spreading, and with it, the perfect image my parents had cultivated for decades was beginning to unravel. Part 4. Their perfect image started to crack. Jason's wedding day arrived on a perfect June afternoon. The country club was immaculate, manicured lawns, flower arrangements that probably cost more than my first car, and a string quartet playing softly as guests arrived. Tom and I slipped into seats near the back of the ceremony area, deliberately arriving just minutes before it began to avoid prolonged interaction with my parents. I spotted them in the front row. My mother in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, my father looking uncomfortable but proud in his tuxedo. They hadn't seen us yet. You okay? Tom whispered, squeezing my hand. Surprisingly, yes, I replied. And it was true. The panic I'd expected, the childhood instinct to seek their approval, was noticeably absent. In its place was a calm certainty that I was there for Jason, not for them. The ceremony was lovely. Megan looked beautiful in her gown, and Jason's face, when he saw her walking down the aisle, showed genuine love. Whatever issues I had with my brother, I couldn't deny that he seemed truly happy. As the ceremony concluded, and the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Jason spotted me. His eyes widened slightly in surprise. Perhaps he hadn't believed I would actually come, before his face broke into a genuine smile. He gave me a small nod of acknowledgement, which I returned. As people began moving toward the reception area, I tugged Tom's hand. Let's go before my parents spot us. We were almost to the exit when I heard my mother's voice. Emma, there you are. I turned slowly. My mother was hurrying toward us, my father following at a more reserved pace. Her smile was tight, her eyes darting between us and the other guests who might be watching this interaction. You came, she said, leaning in to air kiss my cheek. Jason will be so pleased. We've saved seats for you at the family table for the reception. We're not staying for the reception, I said quietly but firmly. We came for the ceremony to support Jason, but we have other plans this evening. My mother's smile froze. Other plans? But it's your brother's wedding reception. Yes, and we've made our appearance. We sent a gift. We're heading out now. My father reached us, nodding stiffly at Tom. Emma, don't be difficult. Everyone's expecting to see you at the reception. I'm not being difficult. I'm being clear about my boundaries. I told Jason we would attend the ceremony only, and he understood. My mother glanced around nervously, clearly worried about who might be observing this tense exchange. What'll people think if you leave now? I don't know, I replied honestly. Perhaps they'll think what they've always thought, that this family prioritizes appearances over genuine connection. That's unfair, my father said, his voice low with warning. Is it? You missed my wedding entirely for a baseball game, but I'm expected to stay for Jason's entire celebration to keep up appearances? My mother's face hardened. Are you still harping on that? We've apologized. No, you haven't, I corrected. Not once have either of you genuinely apologized for missing my wedding. Well, I'm sorry you felt hurt, my mother said dismissively.
There.
Happy now? Tom's hand tightened around mine, a silent show of support. That's not an apology, I said. That's placing the blame on me for having feelings about your actions. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. Emma, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. We are at your brother's wedding. Show some respect. The irony of his statement was almost laughable. Exactly. We are at Jason's wedding, just as you should have been at mine. Without waiting for a response, I turned to leave. Congratulations on Jason's marriage. Send him and Megan our best. As Tom and I walked away, I heard my mother call after us. People talk, Emma. Is that what you want? I didn't respond. Let them worry about their image for once. I was done carrying that burden. True to my mother's prediction, people did talk. Over the next few weeks, the family grapevine buzzed with discussions about my brief appearance at the wedding and abrupt departure. But to my surprise, not all the talk was critical of me. Cousin Rachel called me a week after the wedding. So, you showed up and ghosted, she said, a note of admiration in her voice. Bold move. We attended the ceremony, which is what I told Jason we would do, I explained. Well, it caused quite a stir. Aunt Debbie asked your mom where you'd gone, and your mom tried to claim you weren't feeling well. Then Uncle Mike mentioned he'd seen you leaving, and you looked perfectly fine. I couldn't help but smile at the image of my mother scrambling for an explanation. What did she say to that? She got this pinched look on her face and changed the subject. But later, Aunt Lisa told everyone at our table the real story about how your parents missed your entire wedding for Jason's baseball game. People were shocked, Emma. Like, genuinely appalled. A strange feeling washed over me. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of vindication. For years, I'd believed I was the only one who saw the inequality in our family. Learning that others recognized it too was unexpectedly healing. 3 days later, my phone rang with my mother's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Hello. Emma. My mother's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. What have you been saying to the family? I haven't been saying anything, I replied truthfully. I've barely spoken to anyone since Jason's wedding. Then why am I getting calls from relatives asking if it's true that we skipped your wedding for a baseball game? Why is your Aunt Lisa suddenly not speaking to me? Why did your grandmother call to say she's disappointed in our choices? I sat down on my couch, processing this information. I didn't start those conversations, Mom. But I won't lie if people ask me directly. This is ridiculous, she hissed. You're turning the family against us out of spite. No, I'm allowing the truth to exist without covering it up. There's a difference. The truth, she scoffed. The truth is that we had a prior commitment that couldn't be changed, and you've blown it completely out of proportion. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging with her version of reality was pointless. Mom, I didn't call the family to gossip about you. I haven't reached out to anyone to share my side of the story. If people are upset with you, it's because your actions upset them, not because I've manipulated them. This is damaging our reputation in the family, she insisted. Your father and I have always been respected, and now people are looking at us differently. Maybe they should, I said quietly. Maybe seeing you differently is long overdue. 2 weeks later, an unexpected email arrived from Jason. Thanks for coming to the ceremony. It meant a lot to see you there. Things are weird with the family right now. Mom's freaking out because Grandma called her and read her the riot act about missing your wedding. She said something about changing her will if Mom doesn't fix things with you. I'm not taking sides here, but I thought you should know that Mom's planning to call you to reconcile. Just a heads up, it's not because she's had a change of heart. It's because Grandma's threatening financial consequences. Hope you and Tom are good.
Jay.
I stared at the email, a mixture of emotions washing over me. Part of me was touched by Jason's honesty in warning me. Another part was sadly unsurprised that my mother's sudden interest in reconciliation had nothing to do with genuine remorse. True to Jason's prediction, my mother called the next day. Emma, darling, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. I've been thinking a lot about our situation, and I feel terrible about this rift between us. Really? I kept my tone neutral. What specifically feels terrible to you? All of it. Family should be close, supporting each other. I miss having you at family gatherings. Your father misses you too. I appreciate that, Mom. But for us to move forward, I need acknowledgement of why this rift exists in the first place. She sighed dramatically. If this is about your wedding again, it's about a lifetime of being treated as less important than Jason, I interrupted. The wedding was just the final straw. That's simply not true, she protested. We've always loved you both equally. Love isn't just a feeling, Mom. It's shown through actions. And your actions have consistently prioritized Jason's needs and accomplishments over mine. A long pause followed. I could almost hear her calculating how little she could concede while still achieving her goal of appeasing Grandma. I suppose, she said finally, each word sounding painfully extracted, we may have given Jason more attention at times. But that's because he needed it more. You were always so capable on your own. It wasn't a full admission, but it was more than she'd ever acknowledged before. I needed you too, I said softly. I just learned not to show it, because I knew I wouldn't get the response I needed. Another pause. I'm sorry if you felt neglected, she offered. There's that non-apology again, I noted. You're sorry I felt something, not sorry for what you did. Emma, I'm trying here. What exactly do you want from me? A real apology would be a start. One that acknowledges specific actions and takes responsibility for them. Fine, she said tersely. I'm sorry we missed your wedding. We should have been there. It was the bare minimum, delivered without warmth or genuine remorse, but it was something. Thank you, I said. That's a start. So we're good now? She asked, the eagerness in her voice betraying her true motivation. You'll come to Sunday dinner this weekend? Grandma will be there.
No, Mom.
One forced apology doesn't erase decades of favoritism or rebuild trust. I'm not ready for family gatherings yet, but Grandma specifically asked. This isn't about Grandma. I cut in. This is about our relationship. And rebuilding that will take time, if it's possible at all. My mother's tone chilled instantly. You're being unreasonable. No, I'm being honest about where I stand. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be on different terms than before. I won't go back to being the invisible daughter who accepts scraps of attention. The line went silent for so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight with anger. You know what? You've always had this victim mentality. Always thinking Jason got more than you. Always feeling sorry for yourself. If you want to continue this childish estrangement, fine. But don't expect us to keep reaching out. I won't, I assured her. And Mom? Tell Grandma I'd love to have lunch with her sometime. Just the two of us. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath before I ended the call. True to my word, I met Grandma for lunch the following week at her favorite restaurant. At 82, she was still sharp as a tack, her eyes missing nothing as she studied me across the table. You look good, she said approvingly. Happier than I've seen you in years. I am happier, I admitted. Setting boundaries has been liberating. Grandma nodded, sipping her tea. Should have done it years ago. Your mother has always played favorites, just like her father did with her sisters. I tried to tell her she was doing the same thing to you, but she wouldn't hear it. You noticed? I asked, surprised. Of course I noticed. Everyone noticed. We just didn't say anything because, well, that's how families operated in my day. You didn't air the dirty laundry. She reached across the table to pat my hand.
I was wrong about that.
Sometimes the laundry needs airing. Tears pricked at my eyes. Thank you for saying that. Your parents are in quite a state, she continued, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. 3 of their closest friends have declined dinner invitations in the past month. Apparently, the story of them skipping your wedding has made the rounds at the country club. I didn't tell anyone there, I said quickly. Grandma's eyes twinkled. I might have mentioned it at Bridge Club. Those ladies love a good scandal. I couldn't help but laugh. Grandma. She shrugged, unrepentant. They needed a wake-up call. And nothing motivates your mother more than social embarrassment. The following week brought more evidence of cracks in my parents' perfect image. Jason called to tell me that his in-laws had declined an invitation to have Thanksgiving at our parents' house after hearing about their absence from my wedding. Megan's mom was pretty blunt about it, he said, sounding both impressed and uncomfortable. Said she couldn't respect people who would miss their daughter's wedding for a baseball game. I didn't tell them. I clarified. I know. Megan did. She was pretty horrified when I explained the whole situation. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm horrified too. I should have spoken up sooner. Around the same time, my father's sister called me out of the blue. I've been thinking about you and your parents, Aunt Karen said without preamble. I want you to know I support your decision to distance yourself. What they did was inexcusable. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched. That means a lot. Your uncle and I will be spending Christmas in Vermont this year, not at your parents' house. I told your father exactly why, too. As summer turned to fall, the invitations to family events dwindled for my parents. People were voting with their presents, choosing sides in a conflict I hadn't even asked them to engage in. My parents' carefully constructed image of the perfect family, with the golden son and the doting parents, was crumbling under the weight of truth. In October, almost a year after I'd stopped playing by their rules, my mother called again. This time, her voice lacked its usual assurance. Emma, she said, sounding genuinely distressed, we need to talk. I'm listening, I replied cautiously. Your grandmother is hosting Thanksgiving this year instead of us. She's invited you and Tom specifically, but told your father and me that our invitation depends on making things right with you. She swallowed audibly. People are taking sides, Emma. The family is falling apart. I closed my eyes, absorbing her words. The family isn't falling apart, Mom. Your image of the perfect family is falling apart. There's a difference. Will you tell me what you need from us? She asked, an unusual note of humility in her voice. To make this right? For the first time, I felt she might actually be listening. I need acknowledgement of the pattern, not just isolated incidents, I said carefully. I need you and Dad to recognize how you've consistently prioritized Jason throughout our lives. I need a genuine apology for missing my wedding, and I need a commitment to change how you treat me going forward. That's a lot, she said hesitantly. Yes, it is. Because this isn't about one missed event or one thoughtless comment. It's about a lifetime of feeling invisible in my own family. A long silence followed. I'll talk to your father, she finally said. Can we meet? In person? Yes, I agreed. But I want Tom there too. Of course, she said quickly. Too quickly. Whatever you need. As I hung up, I wasn't naive enough to believe my parents had suddenly developed complete self-awareness or genuine remorse. Their motivation was still, at least partially, about maintaining their standing in the family. But it was a start, a crack in the facade that might, with time and continued pressure, widen enough to let some truth in. That evening, I showed Tom the text from my mother confirming our meeting for the following weekend. Are you ready for this? he asked, concern etched on his face. I think so, I said. For the first time, I feel like I have some power in this relationship. They need something from me now. Tom pulled me into a hug. Just remember, whatever happens with them, you have people who see you exactly as you are and love you completely. I nodded against his shoulder, grateful beyond words for the family I had chosen, the one that had chosen me back. Part 5. But when I stopped playing by their rules, their perfect family fell apart. The perfect image shatters completely. The meeting with my parents was set for Saturday at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Tom and I arrived early, securing a corner table away from other patrons. I ordered a chamomile tea to calm my nerves while Tom opted for black coffee, his hand steady on mine beneath the table. Remember, he whispered, we can leave any time. This is on your terms. I nodded, watching the door. At precisely 2 p.m., my parents walked in. My mother had clearly dressed for the occasion in a designer outfit that probably cost more than our monthly rent, while my father looked uncomfortable in a blazer that seemed to constrict his movements. They scanned the cafe, spotted us, and approached with the careful steps of people entering uncertain territory.
Emma.
Tom. My father nodded stiffly as they sat down across from us. An awkward silence fell over the table. My mother broke it first. Well, she said, smoothing her napkin, this is nice. The four of us, finally talking like adults. I raised an eyebrow. Is that what we're doing? My mother's smile faltered. Emma, we're trying here. Your grandmother seems to think we owe you some kind of explanation. Not an explanation, I corrected. An acknowledgement and an apology. My father cleared his throat. We've already said we're sorry you felt hurt about the wedding situation. What more do you want from us? Tom's hand tightened around mine beneath the table. That's not an apology, I said calmly. That's placing the responsibility on me for having feelings, not on you for your actions. Fine, my father said, his jaw tight. We're sorry we missed your wedding.
There.
Is that sufficient? My mother jumped in. We should have handled it differently. We see that now. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong, defensive, perfunctory, devoid of genuine remorse. Still, it was more than they'd ever conceded before. Thank you, I said carefully. But this isn't just about the wedding. It's about a lifetime of being treated as less important than Jason. My mother's expression hardened. That's simply not true. We've always loved both our children equally. Equally doesn't mean identically, my father added. Different children need different things. And somehow what Jason needed was always celebration, attention, and resources, while what I supposedly needed was to be ignored, minimized, and expected to fend for myself. My father's face reddened. You're being melodramatic. We supported your education, put a roof over your head. The bare minimum required by law isn't parenting, I interrupted. It's legal compliance. Tom coughed to hide a laugh. My mother's eyes flashed with anger. This is ridiculous. We came here in good faith, Emma. If you're just going to attack us. I'm not attacking you. I'm stating facts. You missed my wedding for a baseball game. You've consistently prioritized Jason's needs and wants over mine. You've never once acknowledged my achievements without immediately shifting focus to Jason. That's how you perceive it, my mother said dismissively. It's not perception. It's reality. And it's not just me who sees it anymore. The entire family sees it now. My father leaned forward. Is that what this is about? Turning the family against us? No, I said firmly. This is about me finally standing up for myself after decades of being treated as an afterthought. The waitress appeared with refills, sensing the tension and retreating quickly. My mother lowered her voice. What exactly do you want from us, Emma? To say Jason isn't special? To pretend your accomplishments in school were as exciting as state championships? To apologize for having a son with extraordinary talent? Something in her words, the raw, unfiltered truth of how she saw the situation, hit me like a bucket of cold water. In her mind, Jason's achievements truly were inherently more valuable than mine. It wasn't just behavior that could be changed, it was a fundamental belief system. I want you to recognize that academic achievements are just as valuable as athletic ones, I said quietly. I want you to acknowledge that showing up for your daughter's wedding should take precedence over a baseball game. I want you to see that your unequal treatment has caused real harm. We never meant to cause harm, my father said, his tone softening slightly. Intent doesn't negate impact, Tom said, speaking for the first time. You may not have meant to hurt Emma, but you did. Repeatedly. For years. My mother turned to him with a cold stare. This is a family matter. Tom is my family, I said firmly. The family I chose and who chose me back. Silence fell over the table. My father stared into his coffee, while my mother fidgeted with her watch. If we said everything you want to hear, my father finally asked, what then? Would you come back to family gatherings? Stop this, exile. It's not about saying the right words to get what you want, I explained. It's about genuine understanding and change. And yes, if I saw real change, I would consider carefully reintegrating into family events. My mother's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at my father, a silent communication passing between them. That's Jason, she said. He's waiting for updates. He feels terrible about all this. Does he? I asked, genuinely curious. Or does he feel uncomfortable that his perfect world is being disrupted? He loves you, my father insisted. He wants the family back together. Then he can call me himself, I said. He's a grown man, not a child who needs his parents to mediate. My mother's composure finally cracked. Why are you being so difficult? We're trying to fix this. You're trying to return to the status quo. I corrected. That's not the same as fixing anything. We've apologized for the wedding, my father said, frustration evident in his voice. What more do you want? I took a deep breath, centering myself. I want you to really hear what I'm saying. I want you to reflect on your behavior, not just around the wedding, but throughout my entire life. I want you to understand that this isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern. And what if we can't see this pattern you're talking about? My mother asked. Tom leaned forward. Then perhaps you could consider that multiple people, Emma, your mother, several of your relatives, all see it. Maybe the problem isn't with everyone else's perception. My father's phone buzzed this time. He checked it, frowning. It's your grandmother. She wants to know how this meeting is going. I couldn't help but laugh. Did she set up a reporting system? For the first time, a hint of genuine emotion crossed my father's face, embarrassment. She's been quite vocal about her disappointment in us. She threatened to change her will, my mother added, her voice tight. Is that why you're here? I asked. For the inheritance? No, my father said quickly. We're here because the family is falling apart. Your image of the perfect family is falling apart. I corrected. There's a difference. My mother's carefully maintained composure finally collapsed.
Fine.
Yes. People are judging us. Your grandmother is furious. Your aunts and uncles are taking sides. Jason's in-laws are questioning our character. Is that what you wanted to hear? Are you happy now? In her outburst, there was a strange victory. Not because I wanted my parents to suffer, but because for the first time, they were experiencing consequences for their behavior. I'm not happy about any of this, I said softly. I would have preferred parents who celebrated me equally to Jason. Parents who showed up for my important moments. Parents who saw me. Something in my words seemed to finally penetrate. My father's shoulders sagged, and my mother's eyes filled with tears, not the manipulative kind I'd seen before, but something that looked genuinely painful. We thought we were doing right by both of you, my father said quietly. Jason needed more encouragement, more support. You were always so capable. I needed support too, I said. I just learned not to ask for it because I knew I wouldn't get it. My mother wiped at her eyes. I don't know how to fix this. Start by listening, Tom suggested gently. Really listening to Emma without defending or explaining away her experiences. My parents looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, my father turned to me. We're listening, he said, and for the first time, I believed him. 3 weeks later, my phone rang with my grandmother's number. "So," she said without preamble, "are you coming to Thanksgiving or what? Your mother's in such a state about it she's actually Googling how to apologize to your adult child." I laughed despite myself. "Is she really?" "Oh yes. Found it in her search history when she asked me to look up a recipe on her iPad. She's taking an online course too, something about emotional intelligence and parenting. Your father's doing it with her, though he looks like he's swallowing lemons whenever it comes up." I sat down, genuinely stunned. They're actually trying? Trying is a generous word. Stumbling awkwardly towards self-awareness might be more accurate. Grandma chuckled. "But it's something. Jason's been making an effort too. Called me last week specifically to ask what he could do to be a better brother." "Wow," I whispered. "Don't get too excited. Rome wasn't built in a day, and your parents' emotional intelligence won't be either. But there's movement. So, Thanksgiving." I thought about it. "I'll discuss it with Tom."
Good.
"Let me know by Friday. I'm doing place cards." That evening, I shared the conversation with Tom as we made dinner together. "What do you think?" I asked, chopping vegetables while he stirred pasta. "I think we should go," he said after a thoughtful pause. "But with clear boundaries. We book a hotel, have our own car, and can leave any time it gets uncomfortable." "You sound like my therapist," I teased. "Great minds." He kissed my temple as he reached past me for the salt. "Do you want to go?" I considered the question carefully. "I think I do. Not for them, but for me. To see if anything's really changed. And if it hasn't, then we leave and have Thanksgiving dinner at Denny's." Tom laughed. Very American. The Monday before Thanksgiving, Jason called, a rare enough occurrence that I almost didn't answer. "Hey, he said when I picked up. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I replied cautiously. I've been talking to Megan a lot about everything, and she pointed out some things I never saw before, about how Mom and Dad treated us differently." I nearly dropped my phone in shock. "She did?"
Yeah.
"She's been watching old family videos, getting to know the family history, and she kept asking questions like, why didn't they cheer for Emma's award? Or, how come they didn't film Emma's graduation speech?" And I didn't have good answers. "Oh," I said, unsure how to respond. "Anyway, I just wanted to say, I get it now. Or I'm starting to. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." His voice had a rawness I'd never heard before. I was so caught up in my own stuff, I never questioned why things were so easy for me. "It's not your fault," I said automatically. "Maybe not, but I benefited from it. And I never stood up for you." He paused. "I'm working on a project for Thanksgiving. Something I think might help. Will you be there?" "We're thinking about it," I hedged. "Please come," he said, an unfamiliar note of vulnerability in his voice. "I'd really like you to be there." After we hung up, I sat on the couch, trying to process the conversation. Jason had never spoken to me that way before, like an equal rather than the golden child addressing his invisible sister. "Well," I told Tom that night, "now I'm curious." Thanksgiving Day arrived with perfect fall weather, crisp air, golden sunshine, and trees clinging to the last of their colorful leaves. Tom and I drove to my grandmother's house, our car filled with wine, flowers, and emergency escape snacks in case we needed to make a quick getaway. "Ready?" Tom asked as we pulled into the driveway. "As I'll ever be," I replied, squeezing his hand. My grandmother opened the door before we could knock, enveloping me in a fierce hug. "Good decision," she whispered in my ear. Inside, the house was warm and filled with delicious smells. Aunts, uncles, and cousins greeted us with genuine warmth and a few curious glances, clearly wondering how the family drama would unfold. My parents were in the living room, standing awkwardly as if unsure of their place in the gathering. When they saw me, their expressions shifted from anxiety to cautious hope. "Emma," my mother said, taking a half step forward but stopping short of a hug, respecting the boundaries I'd established. "You came." "We did," I confirmed, handing her the flowers we'd brought. Thank you for the invitation. My father nodded at Tom, then turned to me. It's good to see you. The stilted formality was strange, but also refreshing. No pretense, no forced intimacy we hadn't yet rebuilt. Jason and Megan arrived minutes later, carrying what appeared to be a large covered frame. Emma, Megan greeted me with a warm hug. I'm so glad you're here. Jason's been nervous all week. My brother's face confirmed this, a mixture of anxiety and determination I'd rarely seen on him. Hey, Em.
Tom.
Happy Thanksgiving. What's with the mysterious package? I asked, nodding toward the frame he'd propped against the wall. You'll see at dinner, he said. It's part of what I wanted to tell you about. The pre-dinner mingling was surprisingly comfortable. My parents maintained a respectful distance, engaging in conversation when addressed, but not forcing interaction. Aunt Lisa kept me close, a protective presence I appreciated more than she knew. When we finally gathered around my grandmother's massive dining table, I found myself seated across from my parents, with Tom beside me and Jason and Megan to my left. The covered frame leaned mysteriously against the wall behind Jason. After Grandma's traditional Thanksgiving blessing, my father cleared his throat. Before we eat, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, we have something to say. The table fell silent, all eyes on my parents. Emma, my father continued, looking directly at me, your mother and I have been doing a lot of reflecting since our meeting. We've realized, he glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly, that you were right. About how we treated you differently from Jason. About prioritizing his events over yours. About missing your wedding. I held my breath, waiting for the but that usually followed such admissions. It never came. We were wrong, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. We failed you as parents. And we're truly sorry, not for how you felt, but for what we did. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. I felt Tom's hand find mine under the table as my father continued. We can't change the past, he said, but we're committed to doing better. We've been working with a family therapist to understand how our behavior affected you and how we can repair the relationship if you're willing to give us that chance. The table remained silent, everyone watching for my reaction. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of hurt balanced against this unexpected olive branch. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot to me. I'm willing to try, with appropriate boundaries. Relief washed over my parents' faces. Jason stood up, drawing everyone's attention. I have something too, he said, retrieving the covered frame. Emma, this is for you. He placed it on a stand my grandmother quickly provided, facing me, but hidden from my view by the covering. When Megan pointed out how Mom and Dad had treated us differently, I didn't want to believe it at first, he admitted. But then I started looking back through family photos and videos and, well, I made this. He removed the covering to reveal a collage, but not just any collage. It was a meticulous arrangement of newspaper clippings, academic certificates, debate team photos, and other evidence of my achievements throughout childhood and adolescence. In the center was a blown-up photo of me at Cornell graduation, standing proud in my cap and gown. I found all of these buried in boxes in Mom and Dad's attic, Jason explained. Your achievements were documented. They just weren't displayed. So I made this to show that they should have been celebrated just as much as my sports trophies. Tears filled my eyes as I stared at the tangible evidence of my childhood accomplishments, achievements that had been tucked away and forgotten while Jason's trophies had held places of honor. There's more, Jason said, suddenly looking nervous. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to me. Open it. Inside was a check for a substantial amount of money. What is this? I asked, confused. My portion of the college fund, Jason explained. Mom and Dad spent twice as much on my education as they did on yours because of your scholarship. Megan and I calculated the difference, and well, it's yours. It always should have been. My mother made a small noise of protest, but fell silent when my father placed a hand on her arm. Jason, I can't accept this, I said, trying to hand the check back. Yes, you can, he insisted. It's not a gift. It's a correction. Tom looked over my shoulder at the amount and whistled softly. That would cover a significant part of the down payment for that house we've been looking at. A mischievous gleam entered my grandmother's eye. What house? We've been considering a place in Connecticut, Tom explained. Good schools nearby, reasonable commute to the city. Good schools. Aunt Lisa perked up. Is there something you two haven't told us? I felt myself blushing. We're not pregnant, if that's what you're asking. But we've been discussing starting a family soon. My mother's sharp intake of breath drew my attention. We'll be grandparents? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. Eventually, I said cautiously. We're not quite there yet. When you are, my father said carefully, we'd like to be involved. Whatever capacity you're comfortable with. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my parents looking at me, really seeing me and my future as something valuable and worth their attention. We'll see how things develop, I said, not making promises, but not closing the door either. Jason raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast. To Emma, the most accomplished Palmer who never got the recognition she deserved. And to new beginnings for our family. As glasses clinked around the table, I caught my grandmother's eye. She winked at me, the architect of this reconciliation looking smugly satisfied with her handiwork. Dinner proceeded with a strange new dynamic. My parents deferential, Jason attentive, and the extended family watching it all with barely concealed fascination. When the pumpkin pie was served, Cousin Rachel leaned over to whisper, "This is better than a reality show." I stifled a laugh. Drama without a script. Speaking of drama, my grandmother announced loudly, I've made some changes to my will. My mother choked on her wine. Oh, stop panicking, Deborah, Grandma said with a dismissive wave. You're all still in it. I've just decided to establish a trust for my future great-grandchildren's education. Equal amounts for each child, regardless of which of my grandchildren produces them. She fixed my parents with a pointed stare. And I've appointed Emma as the trustee. She knows a thing or two about the value of education. The look of shock on my mother's face was almost comical. Jason burst out laughing. Well played, Grandma, he said, raising his glass to her. Later, as Tom and I prepared to leave, my mother approached me hesitantly. We have your wedding album, she said, her voice quiet. We ordered it from your photographer after we realized our mistake. Would you like to come see it sometime? Perhaps next weekend? It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. I'd like that, I said. As we drove away, Tom reached over to take my hand. You okay? I considered the question carefully. I think I am. They're trying. It's awkward and imperfect, but they're actually trying. Progress, not perfection. He quoted my therapist's favorite phrase. Exactly. I smiled, watching my childhood home recede in the rearview mirror. And even if it doesn't work out perfectly, I have everything I need right here. In this moderately priced sedan? Tom joked. I laughed and squeezed his hand. In this life we're building. On our terms. As we drove toward home, our home, I realized something profound. For years, I had defined myself by what I lacked. Parents who celebrated me, a family that saw me, a place where I belonged. But somewhere along the way, while fighting for recognition, I had created exactly what I needed most, a life where I was valued, boundaries that were respected, and love that didn't require me to make myself smaller. I hadn't just stopped playing by their rules. I had written entirely new ones. And in this game, everyone could win.